Pinchas. And we're going to start by talking about the daughters of zlofchad. And let me just read the verses, and then we'll go to the text of the Talmud. And after we go to the text of the Talmud, we'll see some of the Hasidic explanations about this. But the daughters of zlofchad appear, chapter 27, verse 1. So let me remind everybody of this story. Vatikravna beno zlofchad ben Chefer ben Gilad ben Machir ben Menashe mishpachot Menashe. So the daughters of zlofchad, who are from the tribe of Menashe, they came, and they came close to Moshe, and the names of these girls were Machla, Noah, Chagla, Milcah, and Tirzah. They stood before Moshe, before the princes and all the leaders at the entrance, Petach al the entrance to the tent, saying, Avinu meit bamidbar. They said, our forefather, our ancestor, our father has died in the wilderness. This is the phrase I want to focus on. Our father died in the wilderness. Vehu lo haya mitoch ha'edah. He was not found amongst the community, Hanoadim al Hashem, that gathered against God, Ba'adat Korach, with the rebellion of Korach. Ki bechato meit. He died from his own sin. Uvanim lo ayulo, and he had no sons. Lama yigara Shem Avinu mitoch mishpachto. Why should the name of our father be diminished? Ki ein lo ben, because he has no son. Give us an inheritance. Moshe brought their judgment before God. Let me just explain this, and then we can look for deeper analysis. I want to make sure everybody knows the story. Basically, we have these 5 daughters of zlofchad, and as they're about to enter into the land, Aaron is dead at this point. Miriam is dead. They're waiting to enter into the land. We know that inheritance in the Torah passes on through the son, from the father to the son. That's how the actual inheritance takes place. So their father had no sons. He only had daughters, and he was dead. So therefore, who was going to inherit the land? Their father was not going to be able to bequeath the land to them. And so therefore, their family, their father's name was not going to have an inheritance in the land. So the name of their father would be omitted. And it's not fair. So they brought their case to Moshe, and Moshe had to bring it before God. Moshe, actually in the Torah, there were 4 cases that developed that Moshe had to get a ruling on them from God. What are the 4 cases? Does anybody know? This is one of them. What are the other 3? Anybody want to chime in? Anybody remember what they are? Okay, nobody? I'm sure you know it. One is in Numbers chapter 9, that's the Pesach Sheni, that the people said, why we were unable to participate in the Pesach Lamb because we are Tameh. And what should we do? And God says, those people missed it because they're far away or they're Tameh. They could bring the Pesach Lamb 1 month later. That's called Pesach Sheni. That's the first one. There's a second one where the children of Israel, what's the case? The second one where they didn't know what to do. This is a very important passage. I'll come back to it. And then there's a third one. The third one is the Mikalel, the one who cursed God. They didn't know what to do to him, so they put him in. God said that you have to kill him. And then there's this one. That's the fourth. So what's the third? The third one was what's called the Mikoshei Sheitzim. That's chapter 15, 32 through 36. I'll just remind us of that, so we remember it. chapter 15, it says, they found the man gathering wood on the Shabbos. So it says they warned him and he did not stop. It said they warned him and he didn't stop. And so what do they do with this man? They put him into like a holding cell. They didn't know what to do to him. So they put him in there, and then and then God says to Moshe, you shall execute him. So the commonality between these other three stories is that Moshe actually didn't ask God what to do. God said what to do. On his own, God said what to do. But here, Moshe has to go and ask. Vayakrave Moshe. Moshe had to go and ask. Moshe forgot the halacha. That's one explanation. Moshe just didn't know the halacha here. He didn't know. He had forgot. He was being punished. The reason why he's being punished is because it said earlier. Hold on one second. Hold on one second. So, is everybody there? I don't know what happened here. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Baruch Hashem.
Yes.
I got kicked off for a second, but now we're back on. So Moshe had said, when it came to the judges, he had said, anything which is too difficult, you shall bring to me. So since he had been arrogant, then therefore he didn't know the halacha. So that's why Moshe was being punished, and the daughters of zlofchad were showing Moshe's sin. But another possibility was that the daughters of zlofchad specially merited through Moshe. That they merited because of their love for the land of Israel. Because they love the land of Israel so much, they merited to have this passage taught through them. It shows their greatness. So what happened was, it says in chapter 5, in chapter 27, verse 5, so one of these cases, which was also missing, was the Mikoshesh sin. Who was this father of zlofchad? That's one of the and how did he die? So here we go back to what Rashi says, and then we'll go to the Gemara. So they made a point of saying that their father died in the wilderness, and he was not amongst the community that assembled on Korach. The Fishayu Baotomar, they wanted to point out that he was not amongst those who were Korach or those who assembled because part of the complainers. Rather, he died through his own sin, and he did not cause others to sin with him. So, how did he die? So, this is the point. Rabbi Akiva said, "Mikoshesh etzim haya." He was the one who was gathering the wood, and Rabbi Shimon says, "Min hama'apilim haya," that he was amongst the ma'apilim. So who's the one gathering the wood? That's the person we just read about in this passage, that somebody went out and gathered wood on Shabbos. Whereas the other possibility is that he was the ma'apilim. Who are the ma'apilim? Well, we read about the Mapilim in chapter 14, verse 4. These were the ones who, chapter 14, verse 44, these were the ones that after God said to Bnei Israel, you're not going to merit to go into the land. They said, we don't care. We're going to go in anyway. And it said in the verse, Moshe said to the people, don't violate the word of God. They woke up early in the morning and they said, we're going up the mountain, even though God told us we can't go in. We're going to go in anyway. We're going to go to the place that God said. And Moshe said, why are you violating the word of God? You won't be successful. Don't go up, because God is not amongst you, and you'll be struck down. So the Amalekites and the Canaanites were there before you, and you'll fall down by the sword. And therefore, Hashem will not be with you. And they were stubborn. They were intransigent, and they decided to go up anyway. And the ark and Moshe did not go with them. They remained in the camp. And so the Amalekites and the Canaanites came down and they struck them and they killed them. So one possibility is, who's their father? Their father was this man, Zlofchad, who was one of the Mapilim. He loved the land of Israel so much that even though God said he can't go in, and if you go in, you're not going to be successful, he said, I'm going in anyway. He said, I'm going up anyway. And he went up and he was struck down. That's one possibility. He went up and he was struck down. And that makes sense, that the daughters of Zlofchad would have been his son, would have been his daughters, and he would have been their father. Why? Because it makes sense that their father loved the land so much, and they also have such a deep love for the land that they're not just going to accept it when they're told they can't get in. When they're told they can't get in, they're going to not accept that as an answer. They're not going to accept it. They're going to continue. They're going to believe in the impossibility. So even though God says only the sons inherit, they're going to go to God and say, no, we want to inherit as well. So it makes sense to say that that they are an offspring of such a man. But why would they say, where would it come from? Where would this idea come from that their father was the one who gathered wood? So it comes from the Gemara in Tractate Shabbos 96b. So I'll read the Gemara to you, and then we'll analyze this Gemara. So the Gemara brings this as a source on 5 lines on the bottom on 96b. Tana Rabban, the rabbis taught, Hamikoshesh zet zlofchad. The person who gathered wood on Shabbos, he is zlofchad. The person who gathered this wood on Shabbos, this wood gatherer that we spoke about in chapter 15, verse 32, that was actually zlofchad. As it states in the verse, the children of Israel were in the wilderness, ish, and they found the man gathering wood. And later on, it says in our verse, it says in our portion, Avinu meis bamidbar, our father died in the wilderness. Our father died in the wilderness. And so since it says in both places the word midbar, it says by Numbers 15, the children of Israel were in the wilderness. Vayu b'nei Yisrael bamidbar, vayim tzuish, they found the man. And since the daughters of Zlofchad said, our father died bamidbar, who was the one who died bamidbar? That was the Mikoshesh Eitzim. So therefore, the Talmud says, just like with respect to the daughters of Zlofchad, it says the word midbar. Also here by the Mikoshesh, Avkan Zlofchad. And that's why Rabbi Akiva says this Zlofchad is the one who gathered the wood, based upon the common appearance of the word Bamidbar, which is not an unusual word, but still he makes that limud. But this teaching of Rabbi Akiva was very, very controversial. Very controversial. That so much so that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira shouts at him. I mean, you could feel him shouting. And this is his language. I'll say it. He says, Akiva. No Rebbe. He just says, Akiva. He looks at him and declares, Akiva. Ben kach u ben kach. Whether you're correct that basically that this one who gathered the wood was zlofchad, or whether you're completely not correct, you're going to one day have to answer for this. You're going to have to answer for this up in heaven for your claim that if you're correct, you're going to have to answer for it, and if you're incorrect, you're going to have to answer for it. Either way, you're going to have to answer the claim that you're making that zlofchad is the one who gathered the wood. Im kidvarecha, if you're correct that it was zlofchad who was the one who gathered the wood, HaTorah kisato, the Torah covered it up and didn't tell us that it was him. And you're telling us that he was the one who did it. So the Torah had a reason for covering it up. So therefore, you'll be punished. The imlav, and if you're incorrect, ata motzi la zalotu tzadik. You're spreading a terrible rumor about that tzaddik. If you're incorrect, it's telling a terrible rumor about the tzaddik, about that righteous person. Which righteous person are they referring to in the Talmud? What is Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira saying? If you're correct, if you're incorrect, you're spreading a bad rumor about the tzaddik. Which tzaddik are they referring to? Who's the tzaddik here? So who's the tzaddik? So I want to come back to that question. We'll just finish this. Okay, no, I don't want to come back. I'll answer right now. So who's the tzaddik? So the first approach is to say that the tzaddik who Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was saying that Rabbi Akiva was going to have to answer to for defaming was zlofchad himself. Even though zlofchad was called a sinner by his own daughters, they said for his sin he died, he's still a tzaddik because his sin was accidental. And there's nobody who's alive who hasn't sinned. But the one who sinned intentionally was the Mekoshesh sinned intentionally. And so therefore, they were spreading lies about him and saying he was a Rasha, when in fact, zlofchad was really a tzaddik. So that's the first approach that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was saying, was accusing Rabbi Akiva of calling zlofchad wicked, when really, in fact, he was a tzaddik. Hold on one second. I see you have a question. Hold on. So one approach is that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was saying, Rabbi Akiva, you're defaming zlofchad. The Torah doesn't say he was the one gathering wood, and you're accusing him of being wicked when he really was a tzaddik because he didn't sin intentionally. But there's another approach. The Tosfos in Baba Basra 119b says the following. Because it says in the, hold on one second. But there's a statement in the text in Baba Basra, maybe we'll have time for it, we'll get to it if we have time, that it's taught that even the youngest amongst the daughters of zlofchad didn't get married until she was 40 years old. She only got married after 40 years old because she was, they were waiting to marry the right guy. They waited till they were 40. So the Tosfos says, it seems that this approach that says in the Talmud that the youngest one to get married got married after the age of 40 is in accordance with the position that says that zlofchad was the one gathering wood. And this incident of gathering the wood was at the beginning of the 40 years, immediately after the incident of the spies. And then Tosfos says these words, and they said, L'shem shamayim niskavein, that the Midrash states that the one who gathered the wood had very good reasoning to collect the wood on Shabbos. Because he said, the Jews might have said, the one who gathered the wood said that he was worried that because the Jews were saying, since they made a decree upon us that we're not going to go into the land from the spies, so therefore we no longer have to keep the commandments, because the whole purpose of the commandments is to keep them fully when we come into the land. So they said, we're not going to keep any of the commandments. So he immediately got up and violated the Shabbos so that they would kill him, and other people would see this. Excuse me. And so therefore, according to this approach, when they're saying you're spreading rumors about this tzaddik, that even though he gathered wood, he would still be considered a tzaddik. That's what Tosfos in Baba Basra was saying. That in fact they were tzaddikim. That the Jewish people felt that they didn't have to keep the land. So according to this approach, Rabbi Akiva is not spreading lies about or defaming the character of the Mikoshesh. He's not defaming the character of zlofchad by calling him the Mikoshesh, right? By saying he did this sin. Just the opposite. He's praising him because he's saying that this person gave up his life because he knew that the Jewish people were not going to keep any of the commandments. So he wanted to teach them that the commandments are still applicable. And so therefore, you have to say that Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira, who says that Rabbi Akiva is defaming zlofchad by calling him the Mikoshesh, argues with the Gemara in Baba Basra, which basically is saying that the Mikoshesh, or argues with this Midrash, who says that the Mikoshesh was a tzaddik because he did this all for the sake of heaven. But the Gemara here is saying he didn't do it for the sake of heaven. And another idea here is from the Iyun Yaakov. He writes that even according to the approach of this Midrash, who says that zlofchad did it, he collected the wood for the sake of heaven, nevertheless, we see that since the Torah covered it up, it means it's not appropriate to reveal such a great sin. And so therefore, Rabbi Akiva was still incorrect. So Rabbi Akiva felt he could reveal it because this person intended for the sake of heaven, but nevertheless, he shouldn't have done it. So now all of a sudden, we see another reasoning for this Mikoshesh, why we can associate the Mikoshesh with the daughters of zlofchad. The Mikoshesh was the one who gathered the wood was actually the righteous person, an activist, a leader, a person who recognized that the law always needs to be upheld. And he says, these people think the law doesn't apply because we're going into the land. We're no longer going into the land, so the law doesn't apply to us. No, the Mikoshesh is somebody who says the law always has to be upheld. And so therefore, the daughters of zlofchad say, we follow the law. We feel that the law needs to be upheld, but we want to know if there is a reason why it maybe the law should be applied differently in our circumstance. So those are the two approaches, if we follow the Gemara closely, about why the father of zlofchad is either identified with the one who died by being amongst the Napilim. That is very clear. It comes from those he loved the land so much, so his daughters loved the land, and they continued to be activists for their cause. Or the Mikoshesh, the one who respects the law so much that he gave up his life to prove that the law always needs to be upheld. And daughters of zlofchad were also followers of the law to that degree, and that's why they brought the case to Moshe to prove that they wanted to follow only what the law said in this circumstance. And they thought that there was an inequity in the law. I'll finish this text here from the Talmud in Shabbos, and then we can see the Talmud in Baba Basra, what it says about these daughters of zlofchad. So the Gemara says, but how could Rabbi Yehuda and Meseira argue with Rabbi Akiva when we have this, what's called a Gezerah Sheva? We have the same word appears in both cases, the word Midbar, and that's what Rabbi Akiva was expounding, that the one who gathered the wood was in fact zlofchad. So the Gemara says the Rabbi Yehuda and Meseira Gezerah Sheva Gamar. In order to learn what's called a Gezerah Sheva, where you make these two different word associations, it can't be just somebody who wakes up and has an idea. It has to be you have a tradition going back to Sinai. You can't just do it on your own. And so Rabbi Yehuda and Meseira didn't have that. So then the Gemara asked this question, like we discussed earlier, and here's where the Gemara says it. Ela mehecha have. So how did zlofchad die? He died from a sin. So the Gemara says, he was amongst those who sinned with the sin of the ma'apilim. And as it says, they continued to go up the mountain, which is that was not as great a sin as the Chilul Shabbos. Rashi says here, the idea of continuing to go into the land, even though God said not to go into the land, that was not as great a sin as the desecration of Shabbos, the gathering of the wood. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira didn't feel that it was going to be, he was going to have to answer to God, because he revealed that Rabbi Yehuda that zlofchad had participated in this sin. A further approach is, if he was, as Sfas Emes points out, if zlofchad was the one who collected the wood, that was only one individual. And the Torah specifically did not mention his name, because it says a man gathered wood. Whereas opposed to the Mapilim, there were multiple people. And so therefore, and there were a lot of people involved in it. And so therefore, it's not a proof that the Torah was covering it up on the fact that they didn't mention his name. Also, the Ein Elio writes that the Mapilim thought that even though Moshe said they shouldn't go up, they thought that if they would sacrifice themselves and go and push themselves to such a degree, that God would have mercy upon them and God would relent. Whereas opposed to, and so their intent was for good. Their intent was for the sake of heaven. They thought God would eventually have mercy. Even though it's against the Torah to violate the words of a prophet, they thought that God would relent. But Shabbos, there was no intent for good there, unless you accept the approach that he did it just to teach people that the law is still applicable. And so therefore, even so, the Mapilim died. It's not a severe sin to say that they died as a consequence of, it's not a severe sin to say that zlofchad was the Mapilim, and as if they had said he was amongst the Mekoshe Shitzim. So this is the Gemara in Shabbos that talks about the distinction about whether zlofchad was from the Mapilim or else from the Mekoshe Shitzim, from the one who gathers wood. So once we're talking about the daughters of zlofchad, I want to show what the other Talmudic text says about them. The other main passage, the daughters of zlofchad, are basically discussed in the Gemara in Shabbos and also in the Gemara in Baba Basra 119b. So the Gemara in Baba Basra says that the daughters of zlofchad the Gemara there discusses the incident with zlofchad's daughters. So the Gemara says that they stood before Moshe, before Elazar the Kohen, before the Nisiim, and before all the congregation at the entrance to the tent. The Gemara asks the question, how is it possible that they stood before Moshe and he wouldn't say anything to them? And then they went and they stood before the Nisiim and the whole congregation. We didn't say if they asked Moses and Moses didn't know the answer to their question, why would they then go and ask Elazar, Kohen, and all the Nisiim? How could they know what Moshe wouldn't know? So therefore, the Gemara says, we have to read the verse backwards. It means say first they came to the princes and the elders. They didn't know. Then they went to Elazar, and only after that did they go to Moshe. That's the position of Rabbi Oshaya. But Abba Hanan says in the name of Rabbi Elazar, they're all sitting in the base medrash. And the daughters of zlofchad went in front of all of them. Wow. And they asked their question. Can you imagine, according to the second approach, that everybody's gathering for chavrusa, learning together, they're all sitting at the feet of Moshe Rabbeinu, studying together in the yeshiva. All of a sudden, these 5 girls walk right into the middle of the base medrash, and they say, this law is not fair. Can you imagine the strength it takes, the activism it takes to be able to have to ask the question like that? Unbelievable, incredible amount of strength. They went ahead and they went and asked that question in front of everybody. Anyway, so the Gemara say, well, what are they arguing about? What's a dispute between Rabbi Oshaya and Abba Hanan? Like, what's the dispute here? So the question is, do you ask all of them? According to the approach of Rabbi Elazar, according to the approach of Rabbi Eliezer, that cholkin kavod l'talmud b'makom harav, that you even give honor to the student, even where the teacher is there, because it's considered honorable for the teacher that you honor a student and they like it. And so therefore, they asked Elazar and the princes, even though Moshe was there. Umar Savar was Rabbi Oshaya said, Ein cholkin, you would not give honor. And so therefore, it's not possible that they asked the students in front of Moses, but they went straight ahead and started with the community and then went back to Moses. But according to the first approach, that it would not be disrespectful to ask the students if the teacher was there, because that's the way the teacher would like it. And the law is that's actually the law, that you can give honor to a student in front of the teacher. And we have a statement elsewhere that everybody's jealous of everybody else except for their children and their students. So the teacher is not jealous if the student is asked the question. Okay, hold on. The question was asked about the tone of the daughters of zlofchad. So it's always, or the context, if they came as supplicants or if they came complaining. So it's always like tricky to try to figure out the tone, but the text of the Talmud kind of hints to this. The text of the Talmud says that the daughters of zlofchad were wise, chachmaniotain, they were very wise, they were darshaniotain, they knew how to expound the Torah, vitzidkaniotain, and they were also very righteous. And that's the name zlofchad. Zlofchad stands for tzadkaniot, chachmaniot, and darshaniot. They were these 3 things. How do we know that they were chachmaniot, that they were wise? Because they spoke appropriately. They spoke in the appropriate manner, and they spoke properly. Meaning to say, they waited till Moshe was teaching the laws of levirate marriage. Moshe was teaching the laws of inheritance, and that if a man dies and he has no children at all, then his brother has to marry his wife, the widow. So they came to Moshe and they said, wait 1 second, what are we? We're daughters. If we don't count as children, then make our mother go to Yibum with with her brother-in-law. And if we do count as children, then let us inherit. So they caught Moshe in an inconsistency. So that shows that they knew the Talmud. They were wise. They knew the Talmud, and they spoke up at the appropriate manner. That's the first point. And the second point is their shamios, that they were expounded the Torah. They said to Moshe, if our father had had a son, we wouldn't be here today. We wouldn't be claiming it, because it says in the verse, if a man will die and he has no son, then then his inheritance passes over to his daughter. And even though the Torah didn't explain that the laws of inheritance apply also to sons and to girls, nevertheless, they understood on their own that when there's a son, the girl did not inherit. And so therefore their claim was, just because there is no son, we should be able to inherit. And the third approach is that we say that they were righteous. How do we know that they were righteous? And that is because there's a special law that developed that they were worried at that time that if they married if they married after they inherited, that their property would be inherited by their husband, and they could have married somebody from a different tribe, and then he would inherit their property, and their property would pass on to another tribe, and then the tribe of Menashe would be diminished. So therefore, it says tzadkanios, they were righteous. Shalo nisu ela hagun lehem. They only married somebody appropriately, and so therefore they married somebody only from their tribe, because they wanted to make sure that they followed the law. That otherwise, that for that first generation, the land might have been transferred out of their property. And then the Gemara says, that we said before, that even the youngest of them only got married at the age of 40. She didn't get married before she was 40. Is that really possible, the Gemara says? But didn't we learn that if you get married under the age of 20, then you could give birth until you're 60. And if you got married at the age of 20, you could give birth until you're 40. If you get married at 40, you'll never be able to give birth. So if you get married at 40, you can't give birth, it says. So the Gemara says, no, because they were righteous, a miracle happened for them, like Yocheved. And just like Yocheved gave birth at an old age, so too, Yocheved was 130 years old. Anyway, we see from here that the daughters of zlofchad, even though they got married over the age of 40, they were able to give birth. And so we know nowadays that people can give birth when they're much older, but that's if they get pregnant, usually through medical assisted. But naturally, if you got pregnant naturally, it still happens, obviously, over the age of 40, but it's obviously the person who gives like that is righteous. So anyway, we also see from here, this basic parasha is teaching us that the daughters of zlofchad, the ones who came and asked for inheritance in the land, to summarize, either their father was one of the mapilim who loved the land so much, or he was the mikoshesh. Either way, he gave up his life of his love for Torah. And the daughters of zlofchad themselves were wise, they were righteous, they expounded the Torah. So they're the shining example of role models for the Jewish people. And so they're people who we should draw inspiration from and emulate. I'll stop here, take questions about this parasha, if anybody has any questions.